So in this video, I will give you a brief overview of the main components that you would traditionally find in a typical online news story. Of course, different media outlets will use different elements. Some will focus on multimedia items, whereas others, such as magazines, will still focus a lot on text. Nonetheless, this should give you a good overview of the anatomy of a, quote, typical, unquote, online news piece. So this is an article I wrote in August of 2019. It's a headline here, and that's the first element. So that's the headline. Its headline reads, "It's really bad. Local businesses lament Eardley Masham Road staying closed until fall." We have a direct quote here from one of the interviewees, and then we have the rest of the headline. Just below the headline or title, we have a series of buttons which allow you to share the story on social media, and that's something that you will find in several news stories online. Then we have the deck. The deck is rather short in this case. CBC and Radio Canada tend to use very short decks, but some other outlets will use longer paragraphs. And the idea of a deck, which is generally located above or below the headline, before the main body of the article, is to give an overview of the article to readers to entice them to actually read the full piece. So that's the deck. Then you have my byline, and then you have information about the media outlet, the date the article was initially posted on, and then when the piece was last updated. Then we have the feature image with a caption and a photo credit, so make sure that you include those elements. And then we have the first real paragraph, which is the lead. So generally your first paragraph will be the lead. And how do you make a distinction between the lead and, say, the deck? Well, first, the location. As I mentioned a few seconds ago, the deck will generally appear before the main body of the article and will often use a different font size. It might be bolded. So that's how we differentiate them. But again, it will really be based on whichever content management system you use. Here we have a great example of a pull quote. So pull quotes are quotes which stand out. Again, that is something that will be managed via your content management system, but that's what we mean by a pull quote. Then we have a map, and I created this map with Google My Maps. Therefore, it is like a social media element, which I embedded using an iframe. And if you go to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, most social media platforms will allow you to copy and paste an iframe whenever you want to share an element. And that's what I did here. I could have done the same thing with a tweet. Moving along, we have a box here. You don't actually see the box, but that's a box, more or less, with hyperlinks. So you can embed hyperlinks within the body of your text. Say here, I could select that and turn these few words into a hyperlink, or you can actually create a series of links which will use the actual headline of each of these articles as the title. And I tend to prefer that because it's then very clear what people are clicking on. However, now and then it is useful to just include a link as part of your text. Here we have a header or a heading or a subheader. Again, the terminology varies, but they all mean the same thing. It is a kind of a second level headline, and generally in the back end of your code, this will be coded as an H2 element, whereas your main headline will be coded as an H1 element. And we will see next fall what that means, but in a nutshell, using a proper structure when it comes to headings. So you have H1 elements all the way down to H6. Making sure that they follow a logical pattern will help Google, Bing, and other search engines to better index your content, and it will also help readers who might be using, say, they are visually impaired and are using a little machine which will read articles for them. Well, that will help them as well. So it's both good for search engine optimization, but it's also a very good accessibility measure. Using captions is also a good accessibility measure, and we will see next fall how to hide within your code an alternative text which visually describes the image. You can also use a line of code called ABBR for abbreviation, which will allow you, say that you were to use here MTQ. The CBC website doesn't yet offer that option. The Radio Canada website does, so I could highlight that here, again, when using my content management system, and I could turn MTQ into an element which would be underlined, and whenever someone hovers over the letters MTQ, the abbreviation, they would see the entire name of Ministère des Transports du Québec. A good accessibility measure once again. So let's move along. We have another photo here, and you might have noticed that my photos are, pretty good. I took them using a DSLR because I had an entire day to chase my story. Sometimes you will have to, find a compromise, and all you might have on you is your cell phone. Well, it is possible, as we will see in the coming weeks, to take pretty good photos with a cell phone. In this case, I had time, so I took better photos with a DSLR. I'm still not quite satisfied with the lighting here, but I couldn't go inside. It was before COVID, but I just couldn't go inside for other reasons. It was just easier to do the interview outside, and the sun was pretty harsh. So not the greatest photo, but it's still pretty good. Another good example of that are the weekly videos I make for you. So, a few words from your instructor, you might have noticed that some of the videos are actually filmed in my home office using my webcam and a pretty good audio system, and I have a TV spotlight. The quality is good enough for our needs. Of course, I could go outside with my big DSLR and shoot high production value videos every week like I did for the welcome video in Module 1, but that would require much more time, and I felt that this wouldn't be a good time investment. And we have to make decisions like this one every day as reporters. Sometimes you're like, oh, it'd be great if I could use a better camera to film this, or it'd be awesome if I could get a fourth interview, but you just don't have the time. So we need to find a compromise, reach a compromise with ourselves in order to produce a good story which meets industry standards, but there is always something better we could do. We have another heading here, another great photo. I kind of like that one because we see the restaurant in the background. The man had just bought it. That was before COVID again. And he had a sign up front saying Restaurant ouvert, so restaurant open. And then you have the name of the restaurant. So there is a lot of information packed into one photo. And we have a video here which was produced not by me, but by one of our social media producers. And the video uses CBC's own video player, but that's a video that could have been posted on Facebook or Twitter and then shared with an embed code. And the video uses some excerpts from the footage I gathered myself because I shot most of this story as a video journalist and multi-platform reporter. I was a producer at Radio Canada at that point, but my CBC colleagues needed extra help for a few weeks, and we were overstaffed on the French side, so scheduling and management asked 2 or 3 of us who were fully bilingual to help out, and I got to report a little bit for CBC, which was a nice change of scenery. And then you have a link to CBC's journalistic standards and practices, and more information about CBC News. And here, that's very interesting. You can report a typo or error. So again, when it comes to transparency, making sure that readers trust you, this is a very good practice here. That is to include a link to your ethical guidelines, a link to information about your media outlet, and then a link so that people can easily contact you if they have a complaint or if they want to report an error. And then further down below, there are automated links to stories that might be of interest to readers, and we have the comments section. So that's the anatomy of a typical news story in a nutshell. As we will see in the coming weeks, you can create a very basic story which follows the inverted pyramid with just text and a photo if you are reporting, say, on a breaking news event, but you can have fun. And if you have the luxury of time to report on your story, like I did here, and I say luxury of time, I didn't have weeks, but I had about a day and a half. I, filmed good footage. I ended up doing audio interviews. I ended up taking good photos, and I had fun with it. And, that's important, because if you have fun reporting your stories, your readers are likely to enjoy your work as well. One last thing, and I should have mentioned it from the get-go, this is a story that I wrote a few months after the 2019 floods. So it is a good example of a follow-up story. I was done with my previous story, talked to my supervisor on the CBC side, who was actually a colleague, but because I was filling in on their side, she became my supervisor for a few weeks. And I asked her whether I could do anything else, and she's like, well, find a story, because we don't have stories right now for tomorrow. So I did a bit of research, and I ended up discovering that this Erdley-Masham Road, which cuts across Gatineau Park and is therefore a shortcut for local residents, had been closed for months because it had been damaged. Although it goes through Gatineau Park, it is not managed by the National Capital Commission, but by Quebec's Transport Ministry. Therefore, I called the ministry, and they were like, yeah, so we have yet to put out a tender. The road might be fixed in the fall. So I called local elected officials. I checked on Google Maps and discovered that there was a restaurant at the southern entrance to the road. So here there is a restaurant, more or less. So I called the owner, and he was like, yeah, drive-by traffic has gone down, so it's affecting my business. Come anytime tomorrow, I will talk to you. So it was a pretty good story, and it is a good example of the different elements that you might want to consider when creating an online news article.